Hello, and welcome to Andre's YouTube vlog for Monday, November 12th, 2012. Now, today is Veterans Day, and I don't think I've actually made a YouTube video about Veterans Day. I've made two about Memorial Day, and mostly they were personal in nature. But considering the election, which will be a week old tomorrow, I wanted to discuss issues that were a little bit different. They're not political, but they are social. And those issues have to do with the war in the Middle East. Now, I know that Veterans Day is a holiday about honoring veterans and not condemning what the military does or whatever. But this to be considered. During the Vietnam War in the 1960s, there was a draft that was going on, and the only way to get away from going to Vietnam was to obtain a draft deferment by going to college or having a perforated eardrum or flat feet or whatever, being disabled, or evading the war illegally by traveling to Canada. Now, in World War II, most of the young people of that time, were very concerned about Adolf Hitler and fascism and Mussolini and Hirohito and Pearl Harbor. So most Americans simply volunteered for that particular war. By the time we got to Operation Desert Storm in the early 90s, the media had begun to enforce patriotism, yellow ribbons, celebrity-oriented shows, and a lot of people simply volunteered. And, I only learned later how that war personally affected people. A couple of my friends later on in my life had been involved in that war. With the previous war, the War on Terror, that took place in Afghanistan and in Iraq, it was 100% voluntary. And most people I know volunteered. And I'm going to be honest. A good percentage of them, not all of them, and I'm not getting personal about this, volunteered for what I personally considered probably all the wrong reasons that one would want to go to war. A lot of it had to do with college money. A lot of it had to do with seeing the world, simply enough. And some of them were actually under the impression, quite correctly, that they were over in the Middle East to give the Iraqi people a right to descend. And which actually probably carried a little naivety with it. And I'm trying not to make judgment here, but I am saying that, I think I expressed this in a previous video that I did, that there's a lot of TV advertisements, now about disabled veterans. Talking about seeing things that, they shouldn't have had to see and feeling like victims. Well, there are two types of victims in this world. A person who's victimized by another, and a person who's victimized by themselves. If you are a woman, for example, who is being beaten by your husband, and you are not doing anything about it and allowing yourself to be beaten, then you are what they call a self-victimizer. And I know it's very difficult. There's nothing really wrong or malevolent being a self-victimizer. It's usually connected to some sort of low self-esteem, but there are counselors to help take care of such issues. In terms of somebody who's victimized from without, that would go under the category of bullying. Somebody who has done nothing to even remotely provoke a situation. And it's often a fine line. But I have to say, if any American soldier in this day and age is playing the victim card, it is definitely not outwardly victimization. I'm sorry. When a lot of these people volunteered for military service in 2001 and 2 after 9/11, there was a lot of awareness out of what basic training encompassed, out of what being in the military meant, and what you did when you signed on the dotted line. So it's hard for them to project victimization from without on TV without me scratching my face or my head a little bit, because I don't see a lot of these injured soldiers as victims of society because of the knowledge they had to have had before they went into the military. I see them as victims of themselves. And I'm not saying I am in any way uncharitable to people with afflictions or disabilities. I am. But not because they were soldiers who were innocently victimized. An injury to a person who served overseas, that's part of what war does. It destroys. It destroys people's bodies, and therefore can destroy families, and can tear them apart. And this was not Vietnam, where there was an enforced draft where people had to go. This was very different, and I have to say that I think people should re-examine their own intentions and their own motivations for things and their own responsibility. And on this Veterans Day, I think there's a group of soldiers out there, and I know this is probably going to receive a lot of negativity, but I'm going to put myself out here. A lot of these soldiers out there who have come back with injuries need to reflect seriously on why they went into this war knowing what would happen to them. And that's what I have to say for this Veterans Day. As controversial as it is, that's all I have to say. Talk to you next time.